Robin Walker, elected as a Conservative MP in 2010. Your dad was a Conservative MP too. What's it like growing up with a dad who's an MP?
He was. I mean, it was funny. I was 14 when he retired, and so for me as a youngster, it was quite exciting because every now and again he appeared on the telly, and that was quite lively. And I got to go to fetes and take part in tombolas and raffles and that kind of thing. That's mostly what I saw of it. And I have to say, the big P politics was not really something I was aware of at that stage. Obviously, as I grew older, it was something I suddenly realised that he had been doing quite important work. There was a stage when I was in my 20s where I followed politics, but I wasn't really sure it was a worthwhile thing. And it was really actually getting involved and working for another MP. I volunteered and helped out in the 2005 election with Oliver Letwin. Seeing it on the doorstep and seeing how you could help people and make a difference then kind of brought home to me when people said to me what an important job my father did, what it was all about. And it was that sort of flicked a switch with me and said to me, this is something I want to do. And at that stage, I've talked to more people about it. I understood more about what he had done during his time. Got the bug bit me, and I wanted to have a go at doing that. But I think people often assume that because my father did it, I kind of arrived in Parliament ready programmed with a full understanding of everything that he had done. And it was very much something that, like everybody else, I had to learn on the job. But sadly, also, I lost him a month after I was elected. So I think it was lovely that he was able to see that I won back part of his old seat. But actually, sadly, I didn't have that fount of advice that I think a lot of people would have assumed I might have done.
Interesting. Now, you are a father of two. Is it a 4 or 5 year old?
4-year-old.
4-year-old.
She'll be 4 3/4, as she'll tell you.
4 3/4, and also a 1.5
That's right.
year old.
Which is lovely, but both handfuls, and great fun. And my wife's also working, so we juggle the childcare between us, and that is always lively. And so my daughter is a very bright spark, absolutely loving being a schoolgirl now, and very enthusiastic about everything. My son is just about thinking about walking, but hasn't quite got round to it yet at 1.5. So we're hoping that he'll do it soon because he's getting very heavy.
How do you juggle that childcare?
It's a real challenge and it's a real battle, and I think it's one of the things that obviously made me aware, but also talking to people in the constituency, talking to MPs or from all over Parliament, from all parties. It's clearly one of the big issues of today is how do we better support that? And in fairness, over successive governments, we've seen approaches to invest more in that space with the 15 hours and then the 30 hours and so on and so forth. But clearly at the moment with the cost of living, it is a real challenge for people, and we're very fortunate. We're both in high-paying jobs, so we can afford to pay for some degree of childcare that allows us to do those jobs. But actually, I recognise that that's a challenge for every family, and it's a challenge which is stopping many women and some men from being able to continue with their careers. That, to me, is a problem for the whole of government. It's a problem for the Treasury. It's a problem for all of government as to how we can help people to be able to do that. But also, having been the schools minister, I've seen really the benefit of the early years and the need for early years education for children when they arrive in school. So this is the reason why, when I was campaigning to become chair of the committee, I said childcare will be the number one issue that we want to look into. We've since launched the inquiry, and I'm looking forward to taking more evidence as part of that. It strikes me there's a lot to be done to make sure we better support parents and children with the childcare that they need, and it's something the cost of which has enormously increased with all the inflationary pressures on nurseries and so on and so forth. But that is also a huge challenge.
So your main bugbear is that childcare in this country is too expensive, and come the next election, you'd like to see your party
absolutely come up with an even stronger offer. And I think I can understand when when you start a conversation on this, they will say, but we've done lots, we've done more than any other government, we're spending more, and all of that is true. But actually, I think there's clearly still major challenges for all parents, and particularly those on lower incomes. And what we need to make sure is that we come up with a serious set of policies to address that. I also think what we've got at the moment is a whole layer of different policies which were done for different reasons. programs. And so the 2-year-old offer, which was done to try and close the disadvantage gap and target the people most in need, the 3 and 4-year-old offer, which is more about supporting parents to be in work, and then tax-free childcare, which in theory is absolutely brilliant, but in practice isn't working as well as it should. So it's got about a third of the take-up that you would expect, and indeed that the Treasury planned for it. And even those people who are taking it up, half of them aren't using their accounts. So something's not right there. And we need to look into, and one of the advantages of having a cross-party select committee look into these things is we can drill into the evidence, look at what is working, what isn't working, and how it could be done better. But what a lot of the sector are saying to us is they want something that's more joined up, something that works for parents, that everyone can understand, that they can understand what they're going to get and what support they're going to get. And of course, understandably, they'll always say they need more funding. And so the question is, to me, partly, how can we make that case to the Treasury? How can I help the Children's Minister and others make the case to the Treasury for why this is a worthwhile area for more funding? And I think fundamentally there are 3 reasons for that. It is for support for parents to be able to continue in their careers and earn more, for support for children to be more school ready and better prepared in the early years, but also early identification of need. We have a huge challenge in this country with the level of high needs and special educational needs increasing all the time. Whenever I visit primary schools, they always tell me we're dealing with more need than we ever did before. Identifying that early and coming up with the right support, whether it's in speech and language or whether it's for children with hearing difficulties, can make a massive difference in the long run to children's ability to engage with education. I had a brother who was dyslexic, didn't find out about it until he was 16. Picking up that need early on and addressing it is something that would make a real difference.
What do you say to mums, and I say mums, sometimes it's dads, but mainly mums, who say, actually, I want to be at home?
That's great. And if people want to be at home and they can be supported to do so, that's absolutely brilliant. I've got no concern about that per se. But I think the reality is many people at the moment feel that they don't have the choice and feel that particularly between the age of 6 months, when maternity leave finishes for most people, and 2 years, that they're not getting any support if they want to do things differently, if they want to get in some extra help, or if they want to send their child to do an early years settings.
And just to talk about Parliament, because mums who are MPs are often asked this, but less so, does the system work for new dads?
Not very well, if I'm honest. I mean, I took 2 weeks paternity leave for the birth of each of my children, and that worked. And in fairness, that worked in Parliament and in government. But obviously, it's a relatively short period. And if you wanted to do shared parental leave, I don't think it would work very effectively. I think it would be very challenging with the whips offices. I also think the so-called family-friendly hours are really anything but. I mean, they mean that you can't see your children at bedtime, except possibly on Thursdays. Yeah. And I was very lucky when I was growing up. The House of Commons had its very unfamily friendly hours, but my parents were in a house in Westminster, so my father actually was able to come back at bedtime and at bath time and say hello to the children and spend some time with us because they were just around the corner. The reality is, with London property prices nowadays, you'd have to be a billionaire in order to afford that kind of property close by. It doesn't work anymore. And so I think that is something that is a challenge as well. Actually looking at how you can make the Parliament more family friendly is certainly something worthwhile. Looking at how you could create more capacity in the nurseries. I applied for a place in the nursery for my son and was told that there wouldn't be one until September next year. Really? So that's a big challenge as well. I think looking at all of these things is worthwhile because it is something that affects both parents. As you say, undoubtedly it tends to affect women members, lady members more. We ought to become a genuinely sort of equal opportunities workplace. That does mean supporting people to be able to continue with their role and do parenting at the same time. And it shouldn't be a choice that you have to give up spending time with your children in order to play your part in politics.
Just want to ask you about the new inquiry that your committee is looking into, and that is about persistent absence of some children from school. Why is that important to you?
This is a big issue anyway, but it's an even bigger issue after COVID. We saw children out of school for too long, we saw too much disruption in children's lives, and we've seen, unfortunately, an increase in the number of children who are persistently absent and missing out on education. And of course, in some cases, those children may be getting brilliant support at home, and in some cases, with home education, there may be parents who are doing a brilliant job of supporting them. The trouble is, we have no visibility to know that. There's no certainty around that. We have issues such as we're doing a session in a couple of weeks' time on county lines and the exploitation of children for crime in that space. Anecdotally, children who spend more time out of school are more likely to get at risk of those types of things, they're also more likely to get mental health problems and problems of isolation, lack of socialisation. So we know that in the vast majority of cases, children are better off in school. We need to look at all the levers that government can pull to make sure that they can get. And a long-standing recommendation of the committee, long before I joined it, was to have a statutory register for children not in school. I have to say, when I was schools minister, I found it extraordinary we didn't have that, and I promised to legislate for that. Now, with 3 changes of ministers later, I want to make sure that legislation actually is on track and that we can make sure, which I think there's cross-party support for, that we have a proper approach to knowing who's in school, who's out of it. And if children are out of school for good reason with parental support, all we need to know is where they are and that they're safe. But if they're out of school for the wrong reasons, we need to find the mechanisms for being able to bring them back in.
Now, it's just prompted, jogged my memory. I can't remember where we are with this. Do parents get fined if they're...
They can do, and so at the moment we have a real mix across the system, different local authorities taking different approaches. I think one of the things the government was trying to do, even during my time in government, was to try and have a more standardised approach. My view is fines are a necessary last resort,
right,
but they should never be the first thing that happens in these situations. What we want to see is local authorities and schools working together to understand what are the barriers for stopping a child come from school, which might be mental health, it might be issues to do with parental concerns and so on. Then how they can remove those barriers, how they can bring those children back into the system, and only if there's parents or somebody else who's standing in the way and saying absolutely not, we're not going to cooperate with this process, then I think fines can be a relevant part of the system. But there's a debate to be had about that, or I suspect different members of my committee may take different views on that. So it's something that I think we should look at the whole piece. Fines is one element of what is at the moment a system which doesn't really seem to hang together properly in terms of whether children are in school or out of school, and who has the information about that as well. I think there's a real concern that we don't necessarily have that line of sight. We saw that during COVID, when obviously many schools were closed to the majority of pupils. Quite rightly, a big worry about that. I think the Education Secretary at the time said it was a mistake to have closed schools to the extent that they did. And I think that's something that we need to learn from. We need to try and make sure that actually these safe places are open for children more, and we need to try and make sure that we have a supportive system.
Did your government get it wrong? You've been in power now for 12 years, and at the beginning of those 12 years there was a push actually towards a more narrow, rigorously academic education system.
I think there's high aspirations for everyone when it comes to attainment, absolutely the right thing to do, but I think narrow is definitely the wrong thing to do. I think we need to make sure that children can progress in their literacy and their numeracy, but the best way to do that is often not just by getting them doing phonics or maths. It's by engaging them in school, making sure that they enjoy school, making sure that they enjoy being there. Particularly with boys, it's also about making sure that they actually get physically tired and don't have that pent-up energy which often makes them play up in class. And so that's where sport has an enormous role to play. And also, as I say, art and music and other parts of it. And in fairness to even the most pro-academic people like my predecessor and successor Nick Gibb, he would be very clear that he wants schools to have a broad, rich curriculum and not a narrow one. So I think it's something that we as a select committee want to engage with that, look at that, and also look at that, how that contributes to this issue of pupil absence or pupil attendance. Final question. Liz Truss has made her first intervention into the political debate since leaving office. Is that a helpful intervention? I'm not sure it's a helpful intervention. I think part of the reason why we are where we are is a certain lack of self-awareness on that front, and I think there's we had 4,000 words over the weekend. I think it's about 4,000 too many in the current situation. That's very frank. You haven't read it then? Not yet. Okay. Robin Walker, thank you very much for your time. Good to talk to you today. Thank you.